Brother Azmir from Malaysia writes that he owns a business of importing and exporting certain types of equipment. And he is wondering about, Ramadan is coming up, he gives zakat every year. He is wondering about the zakat on those equipment items. He sells certain types of merchandise that when he purchases it, that sometimes the merchandise, he knows he's going to buy it, but he hasn't paid for it and it's not arrived. And sometimes, for reasons that he didn't explain why, the merchandise is sitting in his warehouse, but he has not paid for it. Okay, and sometimes he has paid for it and it has not yet arrived, it's on the way. And of course he has merchandise in his warehouse as well, so people come, or call it the showroom is probably a better term, or where it doesn't matter really, but the point is that he has it and people can purchase, they walk into the store and they purchase that particular equipment. So he's asking about the zakat on all of these various types of scenarios.
وما أرسلنا من قبلك إلا رجالا نوحي إليهم فاسألوا أهل الذكر إن كنتم لا تعلمون.
The answer to this question is that this issue of zakat, it goes back to the concept of zakat on merchandise, on business goods. This is in Arabic is called urud at-tijara, urud at-tijara. Urud at-tijara, that which you are advertising to sell. And the vast majority of scholars, so much so that Ibn al-Mundhir, the famous scholar who documented unanimous consensus ijma', the vast majority of scholars say that there is ijma', there is unanimous consensus, even as I said has been mentioned, that there is zakat on urud at-tijara. Now technically there is not actually ijma' because we had one school and one scholar, but that's beyond the scope. In reality, the default position upon which the ummah has pretty much practiced throughout all of its history, you give zakat on business merchandise. Now, your question is not about that. Your question is about when is zakat obligatory on business merchandise? You have a business, you have a warehouse, you have a showroom, and you're in Malaysia, mashallah, tabarakallah, and you are purchasing goods from Europe, from America, and sometimes you haven't paid, sometimes the good is on the way, sometimes it has arrived but the payment hasn't come, whatever it might be. So you're wondering about those gray areas. And this goes back to yet another issue, and that is the issue of qabd, which means you hold on to it. That's what the linguistically translates as. And the meaning here is, when do you own that merchandise? When do you take possession, is maybe the technical way of saying that. When do you actually own or take possession of the item? And this is when you do that, that is when zakat is obligatory. Because obviously when you don't own it and it's not in your possession, then you will not be giving zakat on it. So the issue comes, what constitutes taking possession? That's really the technical way of asking your question. And your question actually can be answered in a very long and detailed differences of opinion back and forth. But I just want to mention that this is one of those gray areas where you will find specific definitions within all of the madhahib. And the position that my teachers taught me, and the one that I feel the most comfortable giving, the position is that possession is something that is defined by one's culture and by the norm of the industry that you're dealing with, right? So possession is not something that there is one cookie cutter definition for every single area. Rather, it depends on your industry and your profession, and maybe even your time and your place, and the way that your own subculture operates. That's what is understood to be possession. And so I will give you a generic response, but I will ask you as well to ask the experts in your own line of business, to ask others that are practicing Muslims in your own line of business, what do they consider to be possession or actual complete ownership. But I'll give you a generic response based upon what I would think is a reasonable understanding of the situation of warehouses and of purchasing goods. And that is that if you have not purchased the good, and you haven't paid any money for it and it's sitting somewhere, but you have the intention that I'm going to buy it, there is no question that that is not in your possession. There's no question you didn't pay and the merchandise is not with you. How is that? Just because you have the intention, you're not going to pay zakat on an intention. There's no question about that. However, if you have the merchandise in your warehouse, but you haven't paid for it, and I don't understand how that would happen, but I'm assuming maybe they would have sent you some samples. Maybe they'll send you 10 samples, and they'll tell you if you like it, buy it. If you don't like it, then you have to return in the next shipment, whatever it might be. So now you have that merchandise. Now, if you cannot sell it, and I'm assuming you cannot sell it because you haven't paid the money. If you cannot sell it, then you don't have possession of it, even if it's in your warehouse, okay? Just because it is in your warehouse doesn't mean that you actually own it or have possession of it. If you cannot sell, and I would assume that if the payment hasn't been given and there's no contract, then you're not able to sell, then there will not be any zakat because you do not own it. You must own it. There must be milkiyya tamma. There must be complete ownership for there to be zakat due. So complete ownership, and a part of complete ownership is qabd or possession when you purchase the merchandise. Now, the other question that you said is that what if the merchandise that you purchased, you have paid for it, but it has not yet arrived. So it's en route. And you have that one day that you calculate your zakat. Because again, our brother is saying that, obviously, by the way, all of the emails that come, I summarize them. So he mentions that there's one particular day in Ramadan that he gives zakat, and that day is coming up in 1 month, and Ramadan is coming up in 1 month. So he wants to know if the merchandise does not arrive, but it is on the way. It might come in a week or two. I know I paid for it. It's on its way from Europe, but it's not in my warehouse yet. Do I pay zakat or not? And I would say, and Allah Azza wa Jalla knows best, and do ask other scholars and other experts in your own industry. But I would feel generically comfortable saying that if it's not in your warehouse, and it's not in your actual possession, meaning you're not there, you cannot sell it then. And therefore, in this case, there will not be zakat due on it. Because the way that zakat is calculated on merchandise for sale is that the day of your zakat, you have a day of the Hijri calendar where you decide you want to pay zakat. Every year must be the same date. So the day of your zakat, you look at your merchandise that you have in your possession. You look at your store, your warehouse. You look at the goods that you are able to sell on that day. If your merchandise has not arrived, you don't have it to sell. So it will not be under the zakat amount. So you make the estimate of the merchandise on that day, and then you pay 2.5% of the value that is going to be advertised, that is going to be sold. The value of the merchandise, you pay 2.5% if obviously the amount is more than the nisab, which is basically, the amount of gold and silver. And generally speaking, every business owner that has multiple equipments and whatnot, you will have more than the nisab. So this is in a nutshell. And again, to be very precise so that you understand, your question dealt really with another issue, even though you didn't phrase it that way, and that is that when is possession finalized? When is possession finalized? And I said to you, firstly, ask the experts in your particular subculture and whatnot. But secondly, a reasonable response. Possession is finalized when you have made the payment and the goods are physically in your possession and you are now able to sell them to somebody else. Even if you don't actually sell them, they're in your possession. And so they're in the warehouse and somebody can, if they want to, they can buy it. It's being advertised for being sold. Then there is no question that you will give zakat on that. Anything that is en route or anything you have not paid for, Allah knows best, but I would tell you the default is that you do not have to give zakat on that, and Allah Azza wa Jal knows best.
يا من أجبت دعاء نوح فانتصر وحملته في فلكك المشحون يا من أحال النار حول خليله روحا وريحانا